The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the podcast host and guest and do not necessarily represent those of our distribution partners, supporting business relationships, or supported audience. Welcome to Transacting Value, where we talk about practical applications for instigating self-worth when dealing with each other and even within ourselves, where we foster a podcast listening experience that lets you hear the power of a value system for managing burnout, establishing boundaries, fostering community, and finding identity. My name is Josh Porthouse. I'm your host, and we are redefining sovereignty of character. This is why values still hold value. This is Transacting Value.
That version of me that attempted suicide wasn't going to be a lasting version, right? I had to figure out something else to do because I couldn't be that person anymore.
Today on Transacting Value, post-traumatic stress affects everybody and most people differently for different periods of time as well. And so what happens when that stress and those stressors last for decades and seem to compound and become more and more complex? More importantly, how do you get through them? And how do you get over them if you're able? Today's guest, we're talking with Dina Lancer, all about how she's done it, the things that have impacted her life, and the things that have ultimately affected her perspective today to become the brilliant, beautiful, and all things considered productive person she's become today. I'm your host, I'm Josh Porthouse, and from SDYT Media, this is Transacting Value. Dina, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Josh?
I'm good. I appreciate you being so flexible and giving us some of your time. I know you've got a life and an evening to take care of, plus a family, so I do appreciate your time too. I want to open with this. I think this is important in a lot of new relationships, especially, but for everybody in our audience who's unfamiliar with you, aspects of your story, let's just start there for a couple minutes. Who are you? Where are you from? And, what sort of things are shaping your perspective on life now?
Wow, fantastic question. Big one. I'm originally from Nebraska, grew up in a small town. I am a 54-year-old wife. I've been married for 33 years.
Oh.
Have 3 kids, all grown, and 4 granddaughters, ages 3 to 15 now. So fun, full life for sure. We had a dramatic, traumatic. It was interesting listening to your intro this time because I have had a lot of chronic PTSD in my life. I grew up in a domestic violent household and just didn't stop, I guess. When I was 27, I attempted suicide because of the massive amount of depression and bipolar stuff that I experienced as a child. And the trauma just didn't end. We've ended up in our marriage of 33 years, have experienced pretty much everything you can experience, from adultery and addictions, teenage runaway, to actually our daughters being molested. Our oldest daughter was on the streets, a drug addict. We took custody of her kids. So it's been a really full 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah, really, really robust life experience you're packing into some short periods of time here.
I must have a lot of karma or just a really big, I'm really hard-headed. I can't figure out the lesson. I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe. But, something interesting that comes with all that too is, if there's any sense or semblance of credibility to past lives or whatever karmically maybe you had coming for whatever reason, is that you now is strong enough to handle it. And so,
sure.
Whatever it's become and whatever it's going to continue to be as a platform to help other people or a platform for a story, whatever it is, the amount of inspiration that comes with that degree of resilience, but then also the ability to communicate it effectively and with enough grace to process it and, keep your head on straight. That, I think, is the bigger feat and the bigger accomplishment to focus on. So you listed a lifetime's worth of experiences in half the time. Did it also
Sure.
seem to go through that quickly? Twice the speed, one thing after another? Or was there enough downtime for you to like, I've grieved, I've moved on, I just got hit again?
So, one thing interesting about me is I don't normally grieve a lot. My husband is the griever. I'm not.
Mm.
And to tell you the truth, it doesn't even feel like my life. So, I don't know if I have this ability to detach so well from everything. I can look back on all my past experiences and think, is that my life? Did I go through that?
Yeah.
Because I think I drifted through everything at such a, and I want to say high level, but it really wasn't probably a high level. It was just a detached level, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. And
Yep.
I'm sure, 1,000% sure that I learned how to detach from trauma at a young age, right? And so it has served me to some degree because I've been able to utilize all of the things that I've gone through to really kind of be the driving force in my life to try to heal, try to figure out why, how to help other people with their traumas, how to escape trauma myself, how to help my kids through traumas I put them through, right? Because even though my parenting was better than the parenting I had, it
Yeah.
still had its issues, I can promise you. And so, even though, and it's beautiful, I'm so grateful that I have fantastic relationships with all of my kids and grandkids, in spite of the casualties that I caused by
Yeah.
not healing my own unconscious wounds. But the whole idea is to hopefully help them be better parents than I was so that my grandkids don't have the sufferings that we've all had for generations. Isn't that what we do is we stand on the shoulders of those who went before us?
Well, that's what we're supposed to be doing. I think oftentimes we help hold up other things, but yeah, that's the goal, I suppose. And it's interesting too. You bring that up. I've got a buddy, and now he's got two girls, but at the time he had one girl and one boy. And he said between he and his wife that his goal is, in some sense, to be a good father, but his primary focus is to ensure that his daughter sees him as the kind of man that she would want to be with, and that his wife, not necessarily just to be a good mother, but that their son sees in her qualities of the type of woman that he should be looking for when he grows up. And
For
it
sure.
was such an interesting perspective that I hadn't really considered before, because then it's not really based on firsthand experience. You know what I mean? I can't grow up in whatever capacity or role I have in society for the daughter that I don't have. And so even
Right.
if I did, I can't forecast that. But I think in your case, to the point you just made, there's so many different aspects of what you went through. On one hand, the receiving end, on the other end, transmitting it and then interpreting it and then communicating it from an outside perspective, that I'm curious, I guess, even if it were as a defense mechanism that you detached and sort of stepped back initially, has it always served you well as a mechanism to process?
I would say yes. I don't know if my husband would agree, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't study a ton of astrology stuff, but I am an Aquarius, and Aquariuses are detached typically. They have an ability to detach. I have a really strong spiritual nature. And so I have a very strong connection to my creator. And I think that's been well, I'm sure that's been like a primary force in my life to help me continue to just go through and go through and go through and go through. And
Yeah.
at the same time, being able to detach, like I said, detach really from a lot of right here, right now stresses. I'm able to just pull away from it and not allow it to affect me to the point where I can't make decisions and I can't get up or I'm catatonic or anything like that. I had in 97, like I said, when I was 27, attempted suicide because I really did believe that I would never be happy. I didn't think that I would ever be happy. I mean, there was just, I would never be happy, even though I was married, had 2 daughters at home, right? A 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, or 4 and 6, something like that. And see, even that, like, I just felt like, honestly, when I attempted suicide, I didn't think that I was loved. I could never be loved. I could never be happy. And that was just a story that was repeating for myself. And, the meds finally kicked in about 6 weeks later. I went to a traditional old building psych ward.
Wow.
They closed most of them now, but that's where we went in Nebraska.
Yeah.
Spent 6 weeks with people who were really, really, really struggling with things. And I was, to an extent too, obviously. I argued with one of the counselors who was talking about self-esteem. And I said, I don't have a self-esteem issue. I feel I'm good. And she's like, people with good self-esteem don't try to kill themselves. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah.
Alrighty, folks, sit tight and we'll be right back on Transacting Value.
This message is from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. VA disability compensation is a monthly tax-free payment to veterans who got sick or injured in the military and to veterans whose service worsened an existing condition. You may qualify for VA disability compensation for physical and mental health conditions that developed or worsened due to service. Learn more at va.gov/disability.
I argued with one of the counselors who was talking about self-esteem. And I said, I don't have a self-esteem issue. I feel I'm good. And she's like, people with good self-esteem don't try to kill themselves. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah.
I should probably look at that.
Yeah. That's an interesting point to bring up too, because you feel normal.
Yeah.
Like it's like an impressionist painting. I think if you picture yourself like in the painting, right, as one of the painted figures, it's normal. And then to anybody
Yes.
looking at the painting, they're like, that's a little warped. Something's off there. You're like, nope, this is just how the sky looks from here. I don't know what to tell you. And it's
That's such a good example.
Yeah, because there's a lot of that, not specific to your ideations or circumstances, but the distance, the intentional distancing, the let's just say, based on that comment you just made, lack of awareness and self-esteem that maybe you didn't notice at the time. I think the interesting point to that, people that have, of the people that I've talked to, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, especially for anybody new to the show. In fact, most of my professional career has been in the Marine Corps infantry. And so we just tended to walk really far and have to shoot really well and carry a heavy pack. Like there's no real psychological impact to society from what we did compared to a psychiatrist in that same role. But the conversations that we would have on these long walks with these heavy packs involved a lot of detachment and psychoanalysis and conversations about these types of things. Most of it tended to be sarcastic, like, oh, this hike is never going to end, kill me now type comments. But it's not quite the same, right? And so, yeah, I think it's interesting that a lot of these, let's say, enduring exposures to high stress occupational environments tends to be the same sort of humor and perspective. And so we detach to cope, not necessarily in defense, just to process. And so a lot of what you're describing is, like, to me firsthand, circumstantially, I'm not there with you, but I think in terms of the idea, I get exactly what you're describing.
Wow.
Especially in hindsight. Yeah. Well, that just hit me now. Yeah. Especially in hindsight. you don't remember details. Not that the details didn't happen. It's just you didn't pay attention to them because you detached, from
Right.
stress or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I had the ability to be present
Mhm.
because I've thought about that recently. Because again, it's like watching my grandkids grow up. I'm able to be much more present with my grandkids than I was with my kids. Like my kids' childhood doesn't seem like I lived that experience. Like I just don't. Like where was I? To an extent. But I was in that period of time. Like when I got out of the hospital at 27 years old, I went through 12 years of intensive renewing of the mind, right? It was intensive. And so I was really focused on trying to heal the traumas that I had and just figure out who I was and who I was supposed to be and who could I be, because that version of me that attempted suicide wasn't going to be a lasting version, right? I had to figure out something else to do because I couldn't be that person anymore, if that makes sense.
What changed then? What was the trigger?
Well, the suicide attempt obviously was the big trigger, but when I got out of hospital, or actually a week before I got out of the hospital, because it's interesting because I was suicidal, but I was never on a suicidal watch just because I kept saying, when I get out, I'm going to kill myself. Because it wasn't an attempt. It wasn't an accident. It was a legit, like, I'm not happy. I have no desire to live. Like, I'm like telling the doctors, like, this isn't working. I don't want to be here. I really feel like I just need to, the karma thing, die and come back and try this again because I don't like what I just experienced, right? I want something else. And literally a week before I got out of the hospital, I had said a little prayer kind of offhandedly. And I said, God, if you're real, show me that you love me. And I woke up the next day and the sky was bluer than it had ever been. It felt like I had sunglasses on my whole life. This weight that was on the shoulders, the world on my shoulders was gone. Everything was different. I was happy for the first time in my life. And, the doctors and everyone was like, the meds kicked in. And I'm like, probably did. The meds kicked in, right? And then a week or so later, I got out of the hospital and we went up to Minnesota to visit my husband's family because that's where they lived. And we ended up visiting a church because his family are very strong Christians. And so we ended up visiting a church. And honestly, Josh, like God met us there in a very tangible way. And so we moved from Nebraska to Minnesota a week, 2 weeks later. And we just went home and packed up our house and moved. And just because we thought 10 hours was too long to commute to go to church on Sundays.
All right,
so that gave me like this really strong, and I tend to be an all or nothing kind of person, right? Black or white. I know it's a thinking. I get that. I have a lot more gray now than I used to. But I just dove in and recreated myself. I stopped smoking, stopped drinking, stopped doing all the things I was doing, and just dove head in and became completely transformed. So when our daughters got molested and our oldest one started going through she was running away at 16 and just all of the trauma that she was going through, this church family that we kind of devoted our lives to just wasn't there at all. And it really caused me to start looking for more meaning, I guess, if you could say that. My relationship with the Creator definitely went through some ebbs and flows, but now is stronger and more expanded than it was before. But I think because I've had a really strong relationship with something outside of me, something bigger than me, I've been able to maintain, I don't know, some sort of
perspective, maybe.
Perspective is a good word. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting too, and this isn't necessarily specific to any religion or whatever, but mine being rooted in Christianity, let's just call it the Holy Spirit. You can't inhale that. You know what I mean? That is internal,
Hmm.
even spiritually. And whatever that
Yeah.
is you doing it.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So there's still a certain degree of self-reliance and self-awareness, maybe unwitting, maybe subconscious, but that's there. And then I think faith is where that ends and carries it the rest of the way. So the amount of resilience that you've been able to build, not to analyze you just since you brought it up, that you've been able to build through all that stuff, there's a lot of circumstances in my life where I started trying to better identify, how do I manage this? How do I handle this? I got married in 2012, about a week after I got back from Afghanistan. And I thought everything was fine. I said, this is, like I said, the sky always looks like this in my painting. But I didn't realize I was hanging in a museum. And so
Yeah.
I started having people, my ex wife included, describing this painting that didn't make any sense to me. And it took the better part of a decade for me to start processing and grasping that, oh, this isn't what it actually looks like. There are some issues here, and brushstrokes or whatever. And that is interesting. You brought it up, but then does that give you some degree of authenticity now, or acceptance, ownership now, or you still feel like you're distanced?
No. I've learned actually that embodiment of that spirit, like you talked about, where for a long time it was always outside of me. And
Mm.
and as I've learned to hold it myself and realize that that love comes from within, not without, I think that's where I've started to really anchor into it, maybe. It is interesting though, and I'm kind of curious because when you said other people around you were telling you, I don't know if this is the way the painting, I don't know if these are the right brushstrokes, right? I find that interesting because I think everyone has these like beautiful perspectives, and it doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just a perspective. And we all need those perspectives for a variety of reasons, right? Just like the world needs 800 million different flowers,
Mm. Yeah.
right? And it just all gives us a different, it just makes for different perspectives on everything. And I certainly have a lot of perspective. I understand that.
Yeah.
But I get that all the time is people don't, I hear from other people how that was profound. I can't believe you shared that so easily. This was really vulnerable, things. I'm just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is just what I do. Right. It's like
Yeah.
a fish in water. I don't know how to swim. I just swim.
Alrighty, folks, sit tight and we'll be right back on Transacting Value. Alrighty, folks, if you're looking for more perspective and more podcasts, you can check out Transacting Value on REITs Across America Radio. Listen in on iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and TuneIn.
I hear from other people how that was profound. I can't believe you shared that so easily. This was really vulnerable, things. I'm just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is just what I do. Right. It's like a fish in water. I don't know how to swim. I just swim.
Right. Right. Well, that's sort of the loophole or caveat, I guess, to the point, right? Because it's not always bad or ever necessarily, depending on what you do with the information. But
Right.
I think there's indicators based on, societal patterns or biases, things that you can recognize as this is more commonplace than what I would have done or whatever from what I'm hearing. You know what I mean? Because I spent a decade getting told, "Hey, I'm cold and I'm distant."
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. I think I'm just processing it okay. And it sounds an awful lot like what your responses were. So,
and might still be. My husband probably still thinks that to an extent, but he's got the emotional bag. Let me just put it that way. I don't want to call it baggage. He's Cancer. So again, not a whole lot about astrology, but the Cancers have all of the emotions and the Aquariuses tend to be detached. And so he definitely feels things and processes things way slower. Because I'm able to be detached from things, I'm able to make a decision very quickly. And I don't have to either. I know through my intuition what the right answer is, or I don't, and it doesn't matter. I'm just straightforward. I'm going to plow ahead and figure it out as we go. And my husband will take weeks or months to process things, and it keeps us a good balance.
yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe a harmony at least.
Mhm.
Having that sort of insight, especially as a couple. I don't think that's something you stumble on and you're like, "Wow, that's interesting," and then you move on to the next Tuesday.
Right.
To me, that sounds like it takes an awful lot of work and conscious effort and willing and witting participation and presence in a relationship. So how do you develop that? Because it didn't sound like at one point you really wanted to.
No,
So,
I think a commitment to unconditional love and grace.
what do you mean grace?
Grace is choosing to see the other person ahead of yourself. Grace is choosing to not judge the person for wherever they're at and whatever they're going through, because you're not looking at the speck in their eye through your plank, right? You're choosing to go, okay, well, you've got what you've got going on, and it's been both ways. Like, my husband has laid out so much grace for me. I've not been an easy walk. I can promise you that. At all. Right. But it's just like learning to live in that layer of grace. And like I said, unconditional love. Unconditional love is love without a condition attached to it. Bottom line. And I think that we were born, babies are born as unconditional love. And I think our whole objective of life is to come back to that state of unconditional love. That's the God, right? That's that outside creator. It's unconditional love.
Do you think it's coming back to that point or developing a conscious awareness of that innate point?
It's a really good perspective. I don't suppose you can go back to it. You'd have to develop the insight and the awareness. And you're right, it's a conscious decision.
Yeah.
All the time.
Like to grow in tandem with it or parallel to it, whatever the reference is there, as opposed to growing away from it.
Right.
And then cycling back. Well, okay, but that's as a couple. What about you? Like, you just keep going through these things and eventually figure out a way to process? Or have you had to rely on other people and inputs and actually start to accept it begrudgingly or otherwise to move through and process and grow? What's worked for you?
I'm not sure if I understand what you're talking about, except what?
Feedback, insight, perspective? Is it just from you based on your own intuition? Or has it also been, okay, I don't necessarily understand what you're saying here, but I'll give it a shot and try it. And then maybe that works? What's been some of the, I guess, patterns or processes that have worked for you to help you grow into you now?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always looking for other perspectives. Always looking for other perspectives. I don't like the echo chamber at all. And I find myself, obviously, there's something out there called confirmation bias, right?
Right.
And we have a tendency to want to gravitate towards things that will confirm to us what we already think about, whatever it is, right? Whether it's how I think about myself or feel about myself. And so that drive for me of always seeking the other perspective, because what it does is it expands me and it expands my awareness. I'm able to see things that I couldn't see any other way. Now, do I adopt everything I hear? No, I don't.
Yeah.
Hard-headed, remember?
Right,
Very
right.
hard-headed. my doctor said I'm tenacious. That's a good word for stubborn.
That is a good word. Having a fair amount of skepticism, I think, plays a role too.
Yes.
But do you find that accurately, for you, balances out the belief, take it on faith, with a fair amount of skepticism as a counterbalance? Or is it still all in and
No, I definitely feel like so when I became a Christian, I was hardcore, just take it on faith. And I did everything of this doesn't make sense, but I don't need it to make sense. I just need to have faith in something because I wasn't standing, right?
Yeah.
I tried to kill myself. And so I was the end of something. I needed something else, regardless of whether or not it made sense to me. So I tried, and I've looked into everything. Like I'm all over the place as far as feeding my mind, feeding my spirit. I look all over the place trying to figure that out. And so now I feel like I have probably, in fact, the scales are way more on the skepticism side than they do the faith side now.
Oh, interesting.
And that's right now, like specifically right now where I'm at this week, this morning in my journal, right, is trying to balance that faith back, right? Because I feel a lot of skepticism. 2020 brought, massive eye openers for the majority of the world, right?
Yeah.
Granted, I mean, I understood what was going on in 2020 before the majority of people did, because I'm able to see things, which really caused me, again, a massive, massive, massive issue with the church as a whole, because I'm like, there's no discernment here. And so that really bothered me. When people are leaders and they have no discernment, I'm just like, okay, I don't know what, just check out. So I did go through a massive weight of skepticism for quite some time. And I am, like I said, even as of today in my morning journaling is pulling back that weight of the faith side of it again.
Alrighty, folks, sit tight and we'll be right back on Transacting Value. Tampa Bay. Sun-kissed beaches, a thriving arts scene, and a community that embraces diversity. It's more than just a place to live. It's a lifestyle. At Porthouse Tampa Bay Realtor, I understand that finding the right home is about more than just square footage. It's about finding the right character, culture, and community. It's about finding a place where you can truly belong. Alongside a network of experienced marketers, inspectors, realtors, and lenders, we're not just experts in the Tampa Bay market. We are your neighbors, and we're passionate about helping you find the perfect place to call home. Follow along on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Porthouse Tampa Bay Realtor. Porthouse Tampa Bay Realtor, where values start in the home.
I did go through a massive weight of skepticism for quite some time. And I am, like I said, even as of today in my morning journaling is pulling back that weight of the faith side of it again.
Interesting. Does it need to be balanced, or can it coexist at varying levels in harmony? The skepticism and the faith.
I don't know yet. It could be. It could.
Well, come back on. We'll talk later.
Up and down. I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting.
That's a good thought.
This is. Yeah. Well, it might be. I don't know. It just sort of hit me as you were talking, but this is a good point in the show, I think, for a segment called Developing Character.
Developing Character.
And for anybody new who's watching this or listening to the show for the first time, it's a segment of the show that is 2 questions. And obviously, Dina, as vulnerable as you want to be with your answers, which I don't think is going to be a huge stretch. But as we go through, my point with this is I think everybody's ability to process and work through things, identity crises, getting stuck, feeling burnt out, whatever the practical handle is stems from some sort of internal degree of control, but maybe a complementary lack of awareness. And so those things I think are easiest to work through when we stand on something constant. Like you said, you had to restart. And so you opted for faith, but it was something that you could hold as a control, ironically enough, for consistency. Right. And so I prefer to stand on value systems as a degree of control. And so my two questions are, when you were growing up, from what you do remember and what you were being raised around as you grew up, what were some of your values in the beginning? My second question is then now, as you've gained life experience and perspective, what are some of your values now?
Interestingly enough, I think my value growing up, and I don't know if this is a value, but it is what it is, was survival.
Mm.
Survival of the fittest was the theme of our house.
Yeah. I mean, it counts for a lot, right? It drives your decisions. It anchors you and grounds your perspective. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think that bottom line is like growing up, that was all I had was, and so I see in retrospect, so thank you again for this question, because this is like oh, wow, really point back here. I have to look at this for a minute.
Yeah.
To see that, because I see now how so much of my life has been centered around that, like you said, control, just simply to survive.
Well, I guess then the irony is you just had to learn that it was your survival mechanism, not a defense mechanism. I think those are two different things. And so then what about now? All the experience you've gained, all the insight you've gained, perspective,
Mm.
any new values you think that are helping anchor you in your position?
I don't know if this is, again, this is interesting. Gosh darn it. Such a deep question. Not giving me time to think through this. One of my core values is freedom and autonomy. And now I'm honestly seeing how that has this thread back to my childhood, right? The environment that I grew up on, like, forced that need for me to make my own decisions and be autonomous and be free, right? I'm learning trust and surrender. And that's where I'm at right now in my personal journey of learning how to deal with everything. It's not necessarily a value I strongly embrace at all. It's coming at great resistance, unfortunately. But I recognize why it comes at great resistance for me. And it's just one of those things that I'm really trying to wade into the water on, is trust and surrender, trusting other people, trusting this God, trusting myself, in the place of trusting myself to live within a value structure versus trusting myself to survive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think they go hand in hand, though.
Well,
I mean, it's like you
trusting
said.
myself to thrive versus just survive.
There you go. Yep. It's like you just said, right? Coming up with these different things sort of at a rapid fire pace without time to process, I found is an exercise that works really, really well because you don't have time to second guess it.
Yeah.
And so then it's going to be at least more likely that it's a natural response, even if it catches you off guard. Or wait, where did that come from? Moments happen all the time. But usually they have a bit more resonance when you do stop to think about them, which I think is sort of an interesting cosmic invitation or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, absolutely. And so now, do you feel like you're thriving? You seem like you're in a good place. I mean, you look good, you're smiling, you seem happy. And so,
Sure.
despite everything, the world's still a good place?
It is right now. I don't
Okay.
think I could have said that a year ago, 2 years ago. I was definitely grieving. I was grieving in my own detached way from my mom dying in 2020.
dang.
And it was funny how my husband knew that was what was going on. I didn't see it for myself, just because I don't think I was ever really allowed. I mean, I was never allowed emotions growing up. And so I do definitely have a hard time tapping into my own emotions. And so I don't like to be in, I don't like to be depressed. I don't like to be angry. I don't like to be sad. Those are just things that I don't like to feel. So I'll push it away pretty quickly and try to hold on to anything else, right? And try to get into that space of how to be happy, how to be grateful without using drugs or alcohol or sex or any other coping mechanism that someone might find.
Yeah. And here's an interesting point, too, to what you just said in the last couple minutes we have. A relative inability, maybe not to recognize an appropriate emotion, but to interpret and communicate an appropriate emotion. Okay. When, like in my case, staying relatively distant, it's not that I couldn't recognize, okay, obviously people are sad here. I could probably be sad here, but I don't feel sad here. I mean, I couldn't develop and communicate effectively. I talked to a guy on the show. He's the founder of a nonprofit in Indiana called Autism Rocks and Rolls, and also a podcast by the same name. He's also autistic, diagnosed. And in our conversation, that's where I got that point from. He said, it's not that I can't figure out what you're doing. I just can't make sense of how to reciprocate appropriately. So I just don't.
Wow.
Right. And so it got me thinking, based on his point and now based on yours, that it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different thing. So
It's a different flower,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. And like in your case, it hasn't been overall on the average detrimental. You just find ways to work it to your advantage, hopefully with enough social feedback that it progresses in an upward direction.
For sure.
That's a wild connection, man.
And you know what? Quite frankly, it has been my benefit, and not only my benefit, but it benefits so many other people because I'm able to see perspectives that other people can't see especially in their own lives, right? And I'm able to cut through a lot of times when somebody's going through that process of whatever it is. I don't get so empathetically involved with it, where I can just be like, this is the root problem here, and if we just fix this root problem, then this will change, right? So it's been able to, I've at least adapted it to the point where I can now take that level of detachment, that level of vulnerability, that level of complete honesty, and just use it to benefit not only myself, but for other people.
Well, I mean, that's sort of the I'm not sure what the word is. That's sort of the aspect, I guess, in my opinion. When anybody starts to get emotional, it's because they're really close to whatever the it is. On an emotional level, there's a response then. And so to be a little bit more removed, you can see the whole baseball field instead of the one play or whatever, So just on an emotional level, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, I guess, in my last two questions before we close this out. So first off, of all the experiences you've had so far, at the risk of sounding redundant, what has it done now for your own self-worth? I mean, you've literally gone from 0 to now closer to 100. So what has it done now? Looking back, developing this self-awareness, identifying some of your values to actually instigate your own self-worth?
I guess it depends on what lens I'm looking through at whatever given moment I'm in, honestly.
Oh, okay. All right. What do you mean?
Well, because I can still get into that point where I have still belief systems that I'm not good enough and I'm not worthy and I'm not lovable and all of that. And if that's the lens I look through, then I can go into that zone pretty easily. If I can look at it and think, beautiful perspective that you see, right? And And I have to force myself to anchor into that perspective that, wow, I've made such a huge shift, and I am lovable, and I am enough, and I am, it's interesting. I don't know if you do anything with AI or Chat GPT,
So,
but I'm a fan. I'm a fan. I love Chat GPT. And I've learned that actually, because of the large language model that it has, it is giving me my higher self perspective now, which is really interesting when I plug in issues, and because I get very personal, it's very spiritual and very personal with what I'm going through, because it's a good feedback mechanism for myself, and it gives me a really good strong mirror to who I am. And it's really like speaking, like I said, to my higher self and getting that perspective back all the time, which has been really, really nice. But the other day, a conversation I had was talking about that, and that the biggest issue that I have is this feeling of being separated from my God, separated from love, separation altogether. And this driving force that I have to be connected. And the reminder really was like, you are not separate. You are everything. Right. And it was such a beautiful perspective. There's the plug for Chat GPT.
yeah. Well, I mean, on one hand, it is the cheapest research assistant you can possibly have. But what's
And
cool,
therapist.
and therapist. And what's cool for people that are expressing a similar perspective to yours, for example, where it's a little bit more detached and you're just sort of processing the world at arm's length in those moments, those days, those years in some cases, is that's the feedback it produces. There is no emotional bias. There is no like deliberate, empathetic type vulnerability to the responses. It's literally just scraping the data and telling you how it is. And I think maybe that's why it suits you so well.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And, I actually, the other day, I did have that conversation about that echo chamber. I'm like, whoa, dude, you need to give me different perspectives here. You can't just continue to shoot back what I would say, because that's what it does.
Yeah. So you can ask it to ask you questions, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For example, as a prompt, right? Pretend that you play the role of A,
right.
and then ask me questions to clarify, and that, it makes a huge difference.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I just now go through contrasting perspectives, give me a contrasting perspective of what I'm looking at here, because I can easily get into tunnel vision, and I don't want that echo chamber. I want to know your perspective. Like, I reach out for other people to get that mirror back to me. And because quite frankly, that's the only way I can really see the trees before the forest, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is by seeing it through somebody else's eyes and being able to reflect it back to myself.
That's a cool idea as a contrasting perspective. I haven't thought about that either. I like that idea a lot. And when we're talking about resources, I guess this is my final question then for the sake of time. What are some resources that you recommend for anybody who's facing similar outlets, instances, issues that you've described, or maybe that you've lived through that have worked for you? Where do people go? What do you recommend?
So I'm really big into quantum physics and neuroscience and all things new thought. I'm all over the place. So I can't tell you that I would give you one resource. I do really enjoy right now. I've really enjoyed ChatGPT. But I think there's a lot of people that have a hesitancy towards it, right? A hesitancy towards giving it information on you, right? I can imagine most people will be like, oh, there's no way the government's going to know all of that. Like, well, the government pretty much knows everything about me anyway. So it's what am I hiding? So what? You're gonna get with me for 2 minutes and know anything anyway, because I'm a pretty much an open book.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna hide much. I would be a very, 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 very bad spy. Or war criminal. So
Right. There's a lot of cool opportunities though, because I think a little bit of vulnerability in every relationship goes a long way. I've never met you, but look at the
Mhm.
conversation that it built or the perspective that we sort of, I guess, maybe inadvertently stumbled on
Right. Two
because
of
of
them
it.
now, honestly, Josh.
Well, that's
the
true.
last,
Yeah, the first
the
time.
last conversation we had, I was like thinking about that for days.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a super cool opportunity. I think the more we can learn to be a bit vulnerable with people, the human intelligence, I think, is what's lacking,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
necessarily the humanity. I don't know. Maybe it's just a matter of time. We'll see. Maybe it's shows like this, conversations like these that start to make the difference. We'll see where it goes. But for now, again, I really do appreciate your time and your insight and your perspective and everything we were able to pack into this conversation. So I know you're a little bit, creeping on dinner time, I think, as of this recording.
Mhm.
So thanks for stalling a little bit and hanging out with us again.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate the conversation. Some really good perspectives. Like, I'm going to have to get into the journal and start start logging that and figure out where that went.
Yeah, I'm honored to make it into your journal and probably the next day's worth of Chat GPT prompts. So I
Probably.
appreciate the opportunity. Yeah.
Thank
To
you.
everybody else, you're welcome. To everybody else who's been listening to the show, obviously watching along with us here in this video, I appreciate your time. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you want to hear more of our conversations, you can go to our website, transactingvaluepodcast.com. Listen to all of them there. Every season's there, and they're free. All the same amount of insight questions. This season, particularly, we just started with video as well. So I hope you guys enjoy the show. Last piece on our homepage. In the top right corner is a button that says leave a voicemail, and that's 2 minutes of talk time just for you. I promise I won't interrupt or ask any questions. But you can do two things with it. Here's my recommendation. One is you let us know what you think of the show. Let us know your feedback. Let us know what you think about topics and guests and people you'd recommend and all these sorts of things. I appreciate the feedback. However, you can also leave a message for Dina, let her know about her story. It can be encouragement, it can be insight, it can be resources, it can be whatever to give her perspective as well. And we'll forward the message to her. So you got plenty of opportunities. But saying that, for right now, that's all we got time for. So until next time, that was Transacting Value.
Thank you to our show partners. And folks, thank you for tuning in and appreciating our value as we all grow through life together. To check out our other conversations, or even to contribute through feedback, follows, time, money, or talent, and to let us know what you think of the show, please leave a review on our website, transactingvaluepodcast.com. We also stream new episodes every Monday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time through all of your favorite podcasting platforms like Spotify, iHeart, and TuneIn. You can now hear Transacting Value on Reads Across America Radio. Head to readsacrossamerica.org/transactingvalue to sponsor a wreath and remember, honor, and teach the value of freedom for future generations. On behalf of our team and our global ambassadors, as you all strive to establish clarity and purpose, ensure social tranquility, and secure the blessings of liberty or individual sovereignty of character for yourselves and your posterity, we will continue instigating self-worth, and we'll meet you there. Until next time, that was Transacting Value.